Hello, this is Holly Carr from U.S. Department of Energy. Thank you for joining our webinar today titled How to Become a Green Lease Leader, the latest in high-performance leasing practices and recognition. Today we've got an all-star lineup for you. We can go to the next slide and see who those folks are. I don't know if I would include myself in the all-star lineup, but definitely Sarah Neff and Alexandra Harry will present to you on both the whys and the hows and the whens of participating in Green Lease Leaders. And I'll kick it off with an introduction to just the concept of green leasing and why organizations might want to consider it, and also an overview of the Green Lease Leaders program as it stands today. Sarah Neff is Senior Vice President of Sustainability at Kilroy Realty Corporation. Sarah and her organization are current Green Lease Leaders, recognized as Green Lease Leaders in previous years of the program. So Sarah is going to provide a nice perspective in the trenches of Kilroy's experience with green leasing and why they have found these practices beneficial to their business. Alexandra Harry is a program manager with market engagement at the Institute for Market Transformation here in DC. Alexandra is very involved in the inner workings of the Green Lease Leaders program. IMT really implements this program with support from DOE. So Alexandra is going to give us up close and personal view of the new online application and how folks can go through the nuts and bolts of applying for Green Lease Leader recognition. Next slide, please. So actually, I think we can go to the next slide. I kind of covered the agenda here. Now, we were supposed to have a poll. Do we have a poll somewhere in the lineup? Or is that not in there? I'd like to find out, hey, there it is. Okay, I'd like to find out who is in our audience today. So if folks could quickly respond to this poll. Let us know if your organization is primarily a landlord, a tenant, or both. I suppose if you're a consulting organization, you can let us know which client type you serve. All right, and we'll close this down in about 5 seconds, get folks responding to that, and then we'll take a quick peek at the responses. Okay, pretty even here. A few more landlords than others, but great to know a little bit about who's on the line. We're gonna jump into the content now. Starting off with what is green leasing and what is Green Lease Leaders. We encourage you to use that question box in your dashboard there for the webinar to send in questions as you have them, as you hear the presenters today. We are going to be collecting those questions, forwarding them to the right presenters, and we'll have, I hope, a nice meaty Q&A period at the end where we can respond to as many of those questions as possible. All right, next slide, please. So what is green leasing? We've sort of prefaced our green leasing work in general with some guiding principles, and those are that tenants and landlords should know how much energy their buildings use, pay for energy upgrades commensurate to the financial benefits they receive, and realize savings from cost-effective maintenance and behavioral energy best practices that they undertake. All this to say transparency, transparency, transparency. That the right folks should be benefiting from the right actions when it comes to energy efficiency in lease spaces. And all of the best practices and the prerequisites and credits that you'll see in the Green Lease Leaders rating system today really reflect these basic guiding principles for both tenants and landlords. Next slide, please. So this slide just provides kind of a visual example of what a green lease is. IMT has defined green leasing as energy aligned or green leases, which equitably align the costs and benefits of energy and water efficiency investments between building owners and tenants. So a couple of examples here in this photo of a mall. You see on the left-hand side, the landlord installs a new high-efficiency RTU, and in order to make that additional investment in high-efficiency equipment pencil out, there may be an agreement in the lease that the tenant would actually pay the incremental upcharge from a lower efficiency to a higher efficiency unit, because the tenant is going to be paying the bills and reaping the benefits of that lower energy use over time. So that's one example, and a lease clause that might be included in an executed lease to make that happen. Over on the right-hand side, you see another example with solar panels all over this rooftop. So the landlord has installed solar panels on the rooftop and sells that power to the tenant as on-site renewable energy. That sales price is typically a little bit lower than what the tenant could purchase power for on the grid from the local utility. And so they're able to have a stable cost of energy, a slightly lower cost of energy, and also potentially reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions, depending on who takes the credit for that solar energy, whether it's the landlord or the tenant. Next slide, please. So many, many benefits to including green lease clauses and practices in your organization's leasing. Certainly, there's a cost benefit. IMT in a 2015 study found that utility bills can be reduced by up to 50 cents or a little over 50 cents per square foot with green leasing best practices in place. Obviously, this increases net operating income and can reduce occupancy costs for tenants and landlords as well, depending on where those improvements are made. Typically, an energy efficient space is also a pleasing space and can increase occupant satisfaction both aesthetically and from a financial perspective, that the occupants are moving into a space that is going to cost them less over time. And certainly, last but not least, is the potential to improve landlord-tenant communication and relationship. Simply by having these conversations and by working to collaborate with one another, green leasing can really have a positive impact across the entire relationship. Next slide, please. So enter Green Lease Leaders. This program was initiated in 2013 by the Department of Energy and the Institute for Market Transformation. The program really aims to define best practices in green leasing. We also offer resources and technical support through our website, as well as recognition on an annual basis for both tenants, landlords, and brokers who document these best practices and are able to show that they are implementing them in their businesses. And then finally, final goal here is to drive higher performance in lease space. Next slide, please. So to date, we have 29 landlords, 6 tenants, 7 brokers, and 5 team transactions, which are typically a landlord, a tenant, and a broker working together on an individual transaction that represents best practice. These folks have all been recognized between 2014 and 2017 as Green Lease Leaders. These participating organizations represent over 1.3 billion square feet of commercial real estate, as well as $24 million in annual cost savings based on the practices that they've implemented in their space. Next slide shows you a little more detail of who all these folks are in logo format. There you go. So you can see a nice variety of all kinds of tenant and landlord organizations involved. and we're certainly hoping that this coming year will add many, many new logos to this slide and crowd it out a little bit. Next slide, please. So over the past year, we have been working with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and IMT to update and enhance the Green Lease Leader recognition. A couple of highlights of those enhancements include an explicit portfolio commitment. We ask that folks who participate in Green Lease Leaders are sort of all in, to use a Greenfield phrase from last week, that you really cover all of your US buildings or leased spaces in the commitment. However, we understand that sometimes a full portfolio commitment is not feasible, so we are open to folks participating in Green Lease Leaders on a regional basis or with a particular fund or nationwide, of course. Secondly, we've added 2 levels of recognition to Green Lease Leaders. The first level is a silver or foundational level where you're simply putting policies and programs and standard lease template documents into place and preparing that foundation for implementing green leases across your portfolio. The second or gold recognition level is for those who are implementing green leases actively across the portfolio. So you've got the foundational, you've got all the documents, the policies, the procedures in place, and you're also making it happen in executed leases. We've also added some flexibility to the rating system. So we ask that folks complete 2 prerequisites plus 5 of 9 credits. So there are some choices in what works for your organization and what doesn't. And last but not least, a brand new website, lots of new resources and templates to help facilitate application for recognition. Next slide, please. So I know there's a lot here, but I did want to put up the requirements for both tenants and landlords. You can see there are 2 prerequisites here for tenants, which includes the second prerequisite, which is really very closely aligned with the new Energy Star tenant space recognition. So Green Lease Leaders does not require that folks actually earn recognition for every single space in their portfolio, but that you have a policy in place that aligns with Energy Star tenant space. Second, moving down to the credits, you'll see there are 9 different credits that you can choose from, and we request that applicants for recognition choose 5 of those to pursue. Let's move on to the landlord slide. All right, so if we had the landlord and tenant criteria side by side, you would see that many of these prerequisites and credits correspond very closely to those for landlord or for tenants, and that really is to enable a conversation between landlords and tenants. You know, where it says disclose whole building Energy Star scores annually, item 3 there's a connected credit 3 for tenants to request that Energy Star score annually. So that each of these credits is really meant to start a conversation between landlords and tenants. I will point out that number 9 for both landlords and tenants is demonstrate innovation in leasing. This is a new credit, and it really is an open credit to let folks show us your creativity. And this is where innovation comes from, is folks in the trenches doing this work and coming up with creative ideas to work with landlords and tenants and to advance energy efficiency in lease spaces. So if you're doing something interesting, different, new, let us know about it, and it will likely be worth a credit in this rating system. Next slide, please. So we went over this a little bit, the requirements for recognition and the differences between foundation level and implementation level. As I mentioned, Gold level is everything that happens in silver, but also showing documentation of an executed, at least one executed lease that contains all of the elements of the credits and prerequisites. We ask for information about the square footage of your portfolio that is covered under these leases. So the hope is that as you move forward executing new leases or renewing existing leases, that these policies and standards that you put in place will apply to those new and renewing leases. We are not asking or requiring that folks go back and renegotiate existing leases. This is only for activity that you have moving forward. And then finally, for the gold level, there's also a case study involved. So we really want to know what is working for you, and we want to show examples of best practice in particular lease spaces, or examples of corporate innovation that we can share with others that they may be able to replicate in their own portfolios. Next slide, please. All right, so this is our testimonial. We're grateful to have Sarah Neff on the line to talk with us a little bit about Green Lease leaders from the landlord perspective. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and let her tell you the story of Kilroy.
Hi, everybody. This is Sarah, and I have to, just before I start, apologize. The floor above us is undergoing, I promise, a very green tenant fit out right now. So if you hear banging, that's them. So anyway, can we just go to the next slide? So my name is Sarah Neff. I am the Senior Vice President of Sustainability for Kilroy Realty. And I'm going to talk about why we bothered with green leasing, and how we implemented that, and then what the benefits have been since then. And I'll give 3 very short stories about sort of how that has played out. So why green leasing? So for starters, the whole point is saving energy. So for example, if I want to do a lighting retrofit, I need to be able to do that. And that requires capital recovery language. Same with water. When I want to do, an irrigation upgrade, I need to be able to do that. And I need to be able to recover that investment back from our tenants. And that's why the capital recovery language is one of the prerequisites in green leasing, because it really is the foundation for sort of everything Kilroy without it. And maybe I should take a second to talk about what my job is. So I run our sustainability programs here, which span our existing portfolio, our development, and then all of our disclosures. And we'll get to that right now. So it's my job to reduce our energy use. It's my job to reduce our water use, and all that other fun stuff. But it's also my job to report all of this information about all the good stuff we do and all of our consumption to like everything these days. So there's, we have a, sustainability report that has all the info. GRES, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, asks for all the data. And a fun fact is that investors seem to be, it's hard for them to still figure out like what is good and what is bad. And so right now, the more prized thing is your data coverage, rather than showing reductions. Because it's hard, is 2% reduction good? Like, hard to say. Like maybe, like I strive for 2% every year. We've been doing sustainability for a long time, but maybe somebody who has major reduction opportunities, anything less than 10% would be difficult. And then in addition, there's just this flood of other disclosure requirements that I'm dealing with from the Carbon Disclosure Project, Dow Jones Sustainability Index. I mean, without requiring tenants to provide me with their energy data for those tenants, and it's about half my portfolio of tenants that, pay their energy directly to their utilities, my life would be incredibly difficult. It's still difficult to have to waive leases in everyone's faces periodically. I'm doing it right now for Energy Star Partner of the Year and trying to get our data back from all of our tenants. But it's our lease that allows me to do that. So I need the lease to be green in order to be able to actually do my projects and then report on my projects. So that is how I sort of began doing energy efficiency. I will just really quickly take an audience question. Somebody wanted to know if I've used PACE for any of my upgrades. To keep it within the leasing frame, I would be allowed to use PACE for our leases. The reason we don't is because there's some REIT accounting issues with how PACE affects funds available for distribution. So it doesn't work for us at Kilroy. Can we go to the next slide? Great. So how did we implement green leasing at Kilroy? So first, I just want to say that I stand on the shoulders of giants. So I inherited the cost recovery language at Kilroy when I got here 7.5 years ago. And that is because our fantastic guy who was in charge of leasing recognized decades prior how important it was for us to be able to upgrade our buildings. And so what our cost recovery language says that's critical is that we can recover our costs not only, you have options. So you can recover it over the lifetime of the asset if you want, or you can recover it over the payback period. And that's really what's important. You know, leases roll on average every 5 years. And if you can't recover your lighting retrofit before all the tenants move out, then it's going to be really, really hard to justify that benefit. And so that has been a absolutely non-negotiable point in every Kilroy lease since time immemorial. And so I had a really great foundation when I started here. So we were already, I would say, like light green. And then the next thing that happened was that we were doing a lot of LEED certifications. And I was in charge of all of those for our development portfolio. And for those of you who are LEED practitioners, you know that the Green Building Certification Institute has like strange feelings about what has to go into our leases. For those of you who are in California, you may have noticed that they have chosen not to believe us that our projects have to meet code. And so they kept asking us to like put into the lease that, you know, tenants would meet a certain level of water efficiency or installed lighting, even though the strict California energy and water codes don't allow more lighting. And so I kept making our legal teams have these strange one-off requests that were happening over and over and over again as we built more and more and more. And that was I was basically becoming an increasing annoyance to the leasing process. The other thing that happened was that benchmarking requirements in cities, this is IMT's map that I stole from them, started getting passed more and more. So we had the San Francisco ordinance where we own property, Seattle, California passed statewide legislation, Los Angeles provided it. And so having utility disclosure language in our leases just became absolutely critical. And I just want to make a note here that all leases say like tenants have to, you know, comply with laws. I find that is just not strong enough. You know, we have some existing leases for tenants that have been around forever. And, you know, the argument has always been, well, you know, if the whatever benchmarking law is a law, the tenants have to help you comply. And like, that's just like too many words. People don't get it. So, because then you have to find the ordinance language and when was it required and why do we have to do it? Just put the utility disclosure language in the lease and it solves the problem. So those were sort of the motivating factors. You know, we already had a pretty green lease, so our lawyers were comfortable with the idea that we would be greening it. I needed it with LEED. We had more and more benchmarking policies that required it anyway. And then the other thing that happened, which was really fortuitous, is that we were in the process of standardizing all of our leases. So all of our leases would look the same. Kilroy, in the time that I've been here, has grown from a sort of a smaller size company to a mid-sized company. And, you know, leasing used to be fairly regional and then that became just ridiculous. And so now, you know, once we grew to a certain size, and so then we had to standardize it. Every lease, like these little duckies, had to look exactly the same. And because of all these one-off requests and because people had heard about the benchmarking policies, I am happy to say that when the standardization process happened, our legal team reached out to me and say, hey, you keep bothering us with all these strange sustainability requests, you know, let's just standardize it. So give us your wish list. What's everything you've ever wanted in a lease? And it was like Hanukkah, right? So I just got to like write pages of like, make all the tenants recycle, you know, make them put in Energy Star equipment, give me the utility data whenever I ask for it. You know, and a bunch of other, you know, they can't mess with a LEED certification if I'm doing it. They can't, you know, use a really energy intensive TI that would then jeopardize, you know, LEED for existing building certification, you know, and on and on and on. And the feeling of Taylor was like, great, you know, if a broker really feels like, you know, pushing back on it, you know, they can, but, you know, let's get that all in the standard lease. And that's what we did. And then, so then our leases were green, those leases started getting executed. And I will just say that the funny thing about it is the one darn thing that anybody has ever pushed back on is the utility disclosure language. And that's the one thing like you need by law. It's the one thing that's totally not negotiable. You know, if a tenant doesn't like the language around, well, you know, I don't want to have to deal with landlord approval around LEED certifications. You know, we can talk about that, you know, whose job it is to approve what. But I cannot brook any change to the utility disclosure time to get everybody comfortable that that language couldn't change. And I think it's, anybody cares, you know, like despite what our utilities might tell us, like nobody, I think, like, you know, unless you're a very high profile tech company and you're worried that people are going to try to do some competitive analysis of what you're doing at whatever facility, you know, people, it's like, it's not like, you know, our launch codes, right? Your energy information. I think people are worried about the burden of having to deal with utility disclosure. And so there are ways to make that easier. And it's something that I think you just get comfort with, you know, hey, we'll just set up your Energy Star portfolio manager account once, we'll get automated benchmarking going, and then it'll be fine. And then people get more comfortable. So I find that with that clause, it's very much more, you know, how much time are you going to take out of my life? And so we did that, and things were going smoothly. And then the next year, the Green Lease Leaders program was announced, and we were really excited about it. And IMT had reached out and said, oh, you should think about applying for Green Lease Leaders. And so we were part of the inaugural class back in 2014 of Green Lease Leaders. And I have to say, before we go on, that it was like crazy. Like at the time, I think now green leasing is a little more normal. But I mean, IMT did such a great job developing this program because, you know, I do sustainability work all the time. I'm never not sending out a press release about batteries or, you know, won this thing. And like, I feel like it's like radio silence for the industry for the most part. But man, when the Green Lease Leaders thing happened, like the news coverage was crazy. Because I don't think people really thought that green leasing existed or could exist, or how is it possible, or how can it be competitive. But you know, we were getting coverage of the Motley Fool and whatever else. So anyway, it really, I think, shook up the industry and changed it a lot, and I think it normalized it. You know, I remember somebody telling me that there was some conference I wasn't even at, and somebody on a panel was saying, you know, green leasing, that isn't really a thing. And then somebody saying like, yes, it is. The Green Lease Leaders just got announced. And so it was a major, it was sort of a major coup. I know, I think has sort of shown the industry that it's really not that hard. I also got the question was, have I ever had a tenant refuse to share energy or water data? The answer is yes. I have one tenant who I will not name because I'm sure they're lovely people. This falls into the category of a big tech tenant who really, I think, and for completely justifiable reasons, is really worried about somebody doing a competitive analysis. I did finally extract energy information, and I just want to say that for this, they didn't sign our lease. They like skirted me by subleasing out from a larger tenant, and I didn't realize that the language wasn't in the agreement that they signed. I did finally get the energy information out of them, but it was like, it involved senior management calls from us to them, and it was like months of begging, and I'm so not looking forward to going through it next year. But yes, that's the only time it's happened. And I have never had another tenant refuse. You know, you'd be surprised who will give you their energy data. TSA, no problem. You know, they're under general services. They have been trained on energy efficiency. They'll just hand you their data on the first ask. So yeah, that's the only time I've ever really had a tenant refuse. And I did get it out of them, but I had to really work at it. And I'm probably gonna have to work at it again the next time. So with that, I'll take it to the next slide. So just want to talk about sort of the benefits of green leasing. Here are all the fun things I'm able to do with my green lease, and I'll tell you some sort of stories from the field. One is I actually, this is what allows me to do all my upgrades. So this is, my lighting retrofit. We do millions of dollars of upgrades every year. And even in the cost recovery language is in there. That's true of energy, it's true of water. And the other thing the utility data does is allows us to celebrate our teams. So one of my favorite projects I ever did at Kilroy was I made a baseball card for all of our chief engineers. So this is one for a chief we have in San Diego. And with the data, we were able to, sort of tell everybody what the energy and water reductions were across the portfolios for our guys. And they absolutely loved this. They loved the recognition. I was getting emails from them saying, you appreciate me more than my wife does. And it's, wonderful to work for a company that actually shows that they care about their employees. And that was really great. And without utility data, I really couldn't do it. I can use, more sophisticated, like 15-minute load profile analytics data to do retrofits, and without monthly data, you can still do a lighting retrofit, but you can't, it's much, much harder to communicate those benefits to anybody. The other thing that green leasing does is it really sets the landlord-tenant relationship off on the right foot. So that's what the middle bottom picture is. A tenant who signs one of our leases, they know going in that Kilroy really cares about green leasing. And it is sort of what sparks further conversation. So my first little anecdote on that is we have a triple net tenant in San Diego who had signed our lease, and so they were aware of our sustainability programs, and they approached us saying, hey, we noticed that you guys do a lot of sustainability, will you install solar on our property? And they wouldn't have started that conversation with us without the lease. We actually did end up installing solar on their property as part of a larger portfolio down there. And so that's just a time where, we all sort of knew what we were all talking about. I have had it happen. We have a GSA as our tenant in several buildings. When you sign a green lease, it also means that you're sort of setting yourself up to deal with some pretty strict language from a tenant. So we had a California government tenant in San Diego, where if I didn't manage to obtain a LEED certification on their commercial interior, they could just pay us 10% less rent in perpetuity. And when we were doing those lease negotiations, it was a little bit scary. But again, Kilroy, we were comfortable, with our history. We felt like, boy, we can't attempt to wiggle out of this one and say we'll do it anyway, but we don't want to promise. And so that is what, enabled and I said, yes, I can get it done. And I did. But I think without a foundation in green leasing, we wouldn't have been willing to step up and sort of accept that kind of language. And then, we do these energy efficiency upgrades sort of all the time. We don't have to let a tenant know that we're going to do an upgrade, especially when it's on, HVAC equipment on the roof. So recently we had a tenant who, had some questions about their common area maintenance charges, and through a lease audit, they had questions about some upgrades we'd done to the mechanical equipment, and the lease audit, showed that, yep, we're totally allowed to do that upgrade, and you were charged properly for it. And so that's really the importance of that capital recovery language, because it allows you to do the upgrades and protects you from things like tenants, wanting to do reconciliations and that kind of thing. And then the last one, I just want to tell sort of my more hopeful story, which is we had a tech tenant move in, and they saw our lease, and they immediately were like, oh, this is so great. Like, we love this so much. And they, immediately had like 800 new ideas for things that they want to do to their building. They want this controls upgrade and that water project and this lighting thing and demand response, and can I get a battery, and let's do this other engagement program. And they do that with us because they know how committed we are. And my sort of funny end to this story is their sustainability person was at Greenville, and she said, Sarah, I want to make my other leases greener. You know, how do I make my other leases look like yours? And so I have a call with her next week to help her on the new deals that they're signing, make their leases look more like ours. And the final thing is sort of awards and recognition. We are totally thrilled to be part of the original Green Lease Leaders program. We are one of the team transaction winners, where we got to involve our tenant and our brokers, and that was the first time that that had happened, which was really delightful. You know, the brokers were never really part of this conversation. I mean, as far as they were concerned, they're like, wait, we just win an award and I don't have to do anything except give you permission? And I was like, yes. So that was really exciting, and we've had some good activities from there. That tenant was really excited too. So it's been great. You know, the program is not hard to apply for. I think the hardest thing about applying was like just the amount of time it took our legal team to redact the executed leases we had to submit, and now it's only one lease, so it's even easier. So it's really not a heavy lift from an application standpoint, and it's been just a complete win-win-win all around, and we're happy to be part of it. And with that, I will turn it back.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's really great to hear from a practitioner about how this works in real life and what the benefits are. And thank you for bringing up the recognition piece and the the surprise from the folks you were working with. I get recognition and I don't have to do anything. I see that we have a number of consultants on the call today, and I really want to encourage folks to think about Green Lease Leaders as a value add to services you may be providing clients as a consultant. So if you are working with tenants or you're working with landlords to help them locate space, develop sustainability plans, whatever it may be, consider Green Lease Leaders as a value add to that client. Say, hey, I'm helping you put together these best practices, these policies, procedures, and you know what? Let's apply for recognition for you as well. So really encourage folks to consider that and to encourage your clients to participate in the program. Additionally, if you are a landlord, consider tenants that you are leasing space to who might be good candidates for Green Lease Leaders, and reach out to them and see if they'd like to either participate with you on a team transaction, or if you'd like to, connect them with us at Green Lease Leaders to help them apply for recognition, and vice versa for those of you on the line who are tenants. If you've got a great landlord like Kilroy and you think they should be earning recognition for Green Lease Leaders, encourage them to participate as well. Let's move on to the next slide, where we'll get into the nuts and bolts of how to apply for recognition. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alexandra Harry at IMT to give us all the details. Alex?
Thanks, Holly. This is Alex Harry. I'm with the Institute for Market Transformation, IMT. And as been referenced throughout the call, IMT and the Department of Energy have collaborated over the past couple years and really moving Green Lease Leaders from an idea to a really robust program that recognizes tenants, landlords, brokers, and the teams in that transaction as leaders taking on adding green energy aligned language into their leases. So I think at this stage we've kind of moved from Green Lease Leaders being the secret sauce, and now it's how can all portfolios across the country, whether they're large companies, smaller companies, how can they take advantage of industry best practices on green leasing. Next slide. Next slide. And so my talk today is really going to focus on what are the mechanics of applying to become a Green Lease Leader, and what is it that you really need to know. The first big thing with our new launch of Green Lease Leaders is that there's a new website. The website is really colorful. There's some hot buttons that you see on the right where you can assess your leasing practices, which will take you to a lease assessment tool. There's a technical resources portal where you can get more information on how to apply, case studies, and then there's also a new streamlined online application. So next slide. So as I said before, there's a new lease audit tool. There's an the audit tool is separated by landlord, tenant, and teams transaction. And the purpose of this tool is that you're able to fill out this short questionnaire, and it kind of gives you a kind of a gap analysis of where does your current lease stand against the Green Lease Leader's requirements. So you can really take a long stare at where is your lease and where could it be, and then it links you to resources on how to improve your lease from there. So next slide. And as I mentioned, doing the lease assessment tool, it's meant to streamline you to getting technical support. So there's a new component of the website where you can join as a participant. Joining as a participant, the idea is that hopefully when you become a participant, eventually you'll become a leader. So there's a few things that you pledge to do when you become a participant. You commit to doing that lease assessment, and then you're able to access receiving one-on-one technical assistance. So that would be myself or someone on the Green Lease Leaders team from DOE or JDM and others who can really help you go from this is where my lease is now to I'm now a Green Lease Leader. And so there's this little short form that asks you a few questions. What's your name, the organization, and then there's those pledge responsibilities. The other big thing that you receive when you become a participant is that you get that insider knowledge of how others in the market are using Green Lease language, and you also get access to additional webinars. So if you're looking for more information, I'd encourage you all to at least start and join as a participant. Next slide. And as I mentioned, the other big thing about the website is the Streamlined Application. The application is you can save and come back to it, and it kind of goes through a cycle of basic information. How do you document your credits? There's a free form narration that you could upload. There's a tab for you to upload your actual lease, and then you move into certification and reviewing and submitting. The big thing I want to highlight is that if you want to kind of get a cheat sheet, you want to see the questions that are on the test before you actually take the test, I would encourage you to click on those links on the right-hand side, where you can get a full readout of what is required, what are the questions asked as you fill out the Green Lease Leaders application. So it is divided by the categories: landlord, tenant, and team transaction. And I believe this webinar will be posted somewhere, so if nothing else, if you want to take a look and prepare your lease, prepare your team for how to apply on this online portal, I'd encourage you to click on those links. Next slide. And so as I said before, the top line of the application just kind of walks you through basic information, credit documentation, certification, and reviewing and submitting. And so the next tab, you can select, out of the 9 or so credits and prerequisites that are available for each of the categories. It goes over what is required to document the credit. And then you have this estimation tool where you're required to estimate how much of your portfolio is operating under this credit. And so if we go to the next slide, you also have the option of providing a narrative, and the narrative is the opportunity if you want to talk more broadly about what your organization's idea and strategy, mission statement is around green leasing. You can feel free to add it there. It's great for our team when we're reviewing it to see, to get an industry look at how folks are using green leasing. Next slide. And then the last step is uploading documentation. So for silver level certification, you're required to upload a form lease. And then if you're applying to different credits related to corporate policies or fit-out standards, this is where you would upload those documents. And then for gold, the requirement is a little more advanced. You're required to upload an executed lease. So the idea is that you move from just a form lease to an actual executed lease. It can be redacted. And then there's also those other tracking documents related to fit-out standards or corporate policies. And then that other category that Holly mentioned that's required for gold applicants is that there is that case study component. Next slide. And so then there's the next thing you just have to do is check off a box that you've answered the questions to the best of your ability, and then you hit submit. There's one last opportunity for you to review and make sure everything is uploaded and referenced correctly, and then from there you'll get an email confirming receipt of your application, and that email will also get a notification on our end that will let IMT and others on the Green Lease Leaders team know that it's time to review an application. And so we'll do a preliminary review, and there'll be a feedback loop between us and the applicant, and we'll contact you if we feel like anything needs to be revised or resubmitted. And then hopefully that back and forth won't last longer than a month. And then from there you'll be notified that you're likely to become a Green Lease Leader. And then later in the timeline, there'll be a big celebration event to recognize all the Green Lease Leaders. So next slide. And so just to get back more into the parameters of the timeline, Green Lease Leaders application period was opened in mid-October. Applications are going to be accepted up until March 1st, 2018. And then spring, early summer, all of the Green Lease Leaders will be recognized at an event. There might be one event that's more geared towards tenants and another event that's geared towards landlords. But that announcement of when the leaders will be announced is, we're still in the process of identifying that at event opportunity. Next slide. And so the other big resources I just wanted to highlight quickly is Green Lease Library. This is a one-stop shop for guidance on green leasing. There's additional webinar recordings, case studies. You can review sample lease language, and then there's also more graphic representation of what's in a green lease. Next slide. And also on the Green Lease Leaders website, if you're looking for guidance, lease language, what does it take to be a Green Lease Leader if you're applying as a landlord or as a tenant, there are 2 reference guides that you can review prior to submitting your application to just make sure that your lease is in good shape to apply. And these are also on the greenleaseleaders.com website. Next slide. And then I just wanted to highlight these 2 case studies that are available on the Green Lease Library website. These are 2 case studies highlighting 2 previous Green Lease Leaders. So back when Sarah mentioned that Motley Fool was highlighting the Green Lease Leaders recognition, this is when these case studies were being developed. And if you all feel like you're really have something exciting to share with the market, IMT and the rest of the team would really love to hear from you, and we'd really love to develop a case study to get your story out to the market. Next slide. And that's all I have about the mechanics of becoming a Green Lease Leader. If you all have any questions, or if you're looking to apply right now or sign up as a participant, I'd love to hear from you.
All right, thanks very much, Alex. We've been responding to questions kind of as they were coming out, one important question that someone asked was, what is the website? And the website for Green Lease Leaders is conveniently greenleaseleaders.com. So please head over there and check out the resources. I did also want to mention, I see that we have some state and local governments on the call today, and we would really love to work with state and local governments to get them involved in Green Lease Leaders, either as tenants and or landlords. In many cases, our state and local partners are both. So really encourage folks to reach out to us if you'd like more detail on the program or help putting together an application. So on that note, a couple of ways listed here to get started. We are happy to do what we call a Green Lease checkup with folks. We have a worksheet that you can look at in advance of a 30 to 45-minute phone call with one of the folks on our Green Lease Leaders team. The worksheet goes through similar process to the online assessment, but a little bit more detail and facilitates a phone discussion with you about where your organization is with green leasing and what some of the most likely opportunities for improvements in best practices are for your organization. So kind of filling out a scorecard. And this typically requires meeting up with some folks that you may not have met before in your organization. So if you are an energy manager or a sustainability person in your organization, you may want to take your real estate team or your legal team or both out to lunch or for coffee and have some conversations with those folks, get to know them and find out if and how you might be able to work together to make some changes to your programs. Then come back to us and we can work through this Green Lease checkup on the phone with you. Secondly, if you have questions about your existing policies or procedures, don't hesitate to reach out by email to Alex or to myself. We're happy to look through documents that you have, existing policies or drafts of new policies, and provide you some feedback. We are really here to make this work for our market partners. And so, you know, we want to provide the assistance that is needed to help you be successful. When it comes to the application, Alex mentioned that folks, you know, submit the online application and then we come back to you with a review. In some cases, it may be perfect and ready for recognition right then. If not, we'll come back with some recommendations or some questions and can provide additional assistance to get that application where it needs to be for recognition. And finally, Alex also mentioned the case study, which is a part of the gold level recognition. We really want to do a lot of the legwork on that case study. So once we have your application and we have a good sense of what some of the storylines are in your work with green leasing, that will help us work with you to put that case study together. We can do much of the drafting for you and provide you with something that you can show to your leadership and your communications department and make sure that it's accurately representing your work. Let me just look here and see if we have a few questions. One person just asking if the slides for this program will be available, and yes, they absolutely will be. They will be posted in the next couple of days on the Green Lease Leaders website and also available through the Better Buildings Solutions Center.
I see a question directed to Sarah on have my green lease policies to significantly reduce GHG emissions at large properties. The answer is yes. It is very hard, and I don't think a great use of the tease out where it's like my engineer's doing a great job that year versus, you know, and some tenant behavior stuff versus green leasing. Since I've been at Kilroy, we've reduced our energy use and our assets by about 13%. And I know how much my budget is versus how much overall energy we reduce. And so I would probably peg a third of those reductions to direct upgrades that I'm allowed to do as a result of our capital recovery language. So that's as good as I can get to quantifying it. And the other question is, how do you get started when you don't have, you know, the kind of sort of friendly legal people that I'm lucky enough to have at Kilroy? And where I would start with that is, first of all, look to see about benchmarking laws. So, you know, if you have a benchmarking law that you get to point to and say, hey, you know, I did this because otherwise we are at risk of fines or ending up on some sort of, you know, scary list or something, that is a great place to start. It's a good compliance. It's a really good place to start. And then talk about, you know, reporting, investors, you know, talk about sort of the things that seem to be out of control. I find for the most part that these just weren't heavy lists. I mean, all you're asking is that these go into the standard lease form. And if a tenant broker doesn't like it, you know, then you can have that discussion then, you know, like these aren't ridiculous lifts. And so I think the argument is always, you know, you're not going to scare away a tenant by asking them to put in Energy Star equipment. Nobody's going to be like, I'm not going to lease space in this building as a result. You know, if they want to fight you on that, then you can take it out or renegotiate, or maybe it's, you know, whatever, you know, tenant will do their best. You know, you can take out from must to, you know, will comply. You know, you can soften the language somewhat in the negotiation, but it really doesn't hurt anything to have it in there. So that's sort of how I would recommend starting. First point of benchmarking, and then make it not your fault, and then make it into the standard lease and say it can get taken out later.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah. All right, and another question about the slides being posted, and yes, they will be posted both to the Green Lease Leaders website under Resources, and they will also be posted to the Better Buildings Solution Center. So you can just go into the Solution Center and type Green Lease Leaders, and it will come up as a search result. All of the folks who are registered for today's webinar will receive an email when the archived version is available. Don't let the conversation stop here just because it's 3 o'clock. Please feel free to reach out to Alexandra, to myself, and to Sarah with additional questions. And I'll just leave by reiterating that that we really are here to help you be successful in the Green Lease Leader program. So we hope to work with you in the future. Thanks for being here.